Hello everyone, welcome to Sociology Lecture 2. Today we are going to get into the three perspectives of sociology, so can't wait to get started. Hope you guys learned something, and yeah, let's get started. Alright, so the first perspective we're going to talk about is the structural functional perspective, and this came from a guy named Emil Durkheim, and he was interested in social facts, which by definition, were basic forms of behavior which he saw as the building blocks of society. And so his question was, how does society hold together? So in America, one example that I use is God. God was kind of that cornerstone that the West and America was built on. And what that means is, with Emil Durkheim, he wanted to know what the elementary forms and the collective conscious of a certain society actually was. And so you kind of have to go to the foundation to see what everything else was built on. And so what the West was built on were things like the justice system, for example. People have certain unalienable rights that are given to them by God that can't be stripped away from them. We actually see the foundation kind of coming out from under the structure in America. Like, for instance, redemption is a deeply Christian idea that the West was found on, and now we see things like cancel culture, where they will dig up 20-year-old tweets and use that to fire you or things like that. So it's kind of God is leaving schools. Everything that those slats are kind of being pulled out from under us, and that's, I think, why America is in such turmoil right now, because those certain building blocks that they were built on are now being destroyed. And so I think we just need to get back to our roots to build up a healthy society. But we're kind of in this weird dance between, like, we don't really believe in God as a society, but we like the idea of God, but we don't really know what we're doing, to be honest. Well, Max Weber was a German sociologist that was from the same era as Durkheim, and he was interested in the same things, like, what is it that holds a society together? And so he was interested in how social institutions adapt to social changes of the Industrial Revolution. So Europe was caught in a political and economic turmoil, which eventually led to World War One. But at the time of these sociologists, they saw the development of a social structure, kind of like what we said with the justice system. There's a certain structure in place. They saw it as an important prerequisite to a healthy society, to be built on something. Society has to be built on something. And so in the West, it's built on, Christianity. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the name Nietzsche, but he was a 19th century German philosopher, one of the best philosophers that ever lived. And what he said was the famous phrase, "God is dead." So what he meant by God was dead was that the Christian underpinnings and the social structure that we know that keeps, Western society afloat was completely coming undone. And this was due to Darwin's theory of evolution, for one, a couple other reasons, but mainly evolutionary theory. Think about it as like a pyramid, and this is the social structure that keeps us afloat, and the bottom of it is basically, Christianity, our facts and values of what we know to be true. And we take that bottom layer out, the pyramid it can't just float. It's going to come crashing down. And basically, he predicted in the 20th century that it would be the most bloody century that humans have ever lived through. And he was right. More on that later, though. Sociologists like Durkheim and Weber believed in that society is a system of interconnected parts with, many people, many skills, many talents that contribute to the organization of a stable society. And so each part has their own function, and society orders itself to promote a balance among the various components. And so any dysfunctional elements must be eliminated so that that social order is preserved. Structural functionalist looks at society with three levels of analysis, and I'll start by stability. Stability would mean that the social patterns contribute to the stability of the society, and through stability, society is maintained. Two would be harmony, which means that the parts of society work together in harmony for the good of the whole. And lastly, evolution. The social structure and culture adapt to new needs and demands. If something is dysfunctional for society, it should be eliminated. So kind of like the idea of survival of the fittest. The second sociological perspective we're going to learn about today is the social conflict perspective. This theory was made by a guy named Karl Marx, and if you don't know who Karl Marx is, I am going to educate you a little bit. I'm going to teach you guys a little bit about Karl Marx just because we see it rising up in today's society all the time. There's so many examples where it's the complete driving force of a lot of the political, economic, and social movements we see today. Marx was born in the 19th century, but his ideas carried throughout the 20th century, and he was probably one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. So if you didn't know, his ideology played out in countries like Russia, China, Cambodia, North Korea, Venezuela. Pick an African country. This guy's ideology was everywhere. Karl Marx's main idea was that the social conflict perspective is basically a power struggle and tension by the people who make up society. And so basically it was two main groups, the oppressor and the oppressed, the people that have and the people that don't have. And the reason that people have anything is because they took it from those who don't. And that's the most appropriate way to view history, is through a Marxist lens, some would say. It's fundamentally an economic view of the world, that if you got rid of the power hierarchy and the people on top just spread out the wealth evenly, then things would be okay. And, there would be no need for crime and things like that, because theoretically the wealth would be shared collectively. And if you're thinking about the future of your country, a Marxist would argue that you need to keep power struggles in mind so that you could even the playing field, so to speak, and so that you could eradicate the unjust power hierarchy and basically bring equality and utopia to mankind. One way that a Marxist worldview and a Christian worldview is at odds, and trust me, there are many, but one of them is that Marxism implicitly makes the case that the cause of human suffering is at root social injustice. Whereas for the Christian worldview, suffering is just a part of life. It was here at the beginning because of the fall of man. And so even if you got rid of social injustice, the Christian worldview says sin will still be a fact of life. So there are some groups that want to abolish police altogether, and you might ask yourself why. How is that going to make anything more safe? Well, it's because that they actually think that the police are the oppressor, and they're exerting their dominion, control, and power over the oppressed, which would be, in today's debate, more of the minority community. And so for them, the police are the oppressors that need to be stripped of all their power. Once you understand Marxist theory a little better, you start to get an idea of where the root of these ideas take hold and shape our own society. Marxist theory also puts group membership and your group identity before the individual, meaning that your group identity and membership is paramount rather than your individuality. One of the reasons we made you guys fill out that group membership PDF was to show you that there are many ways to put you in groups. There's almost an infinite amount. For example, I'm white, male, straight, ridiculously good looking. Your generation's probably never seen Zoolander. 6 foot tall, brown hair, etc., etc. All of these categories, how do you know which one is the most important? Which one defines you the most? So a historical example of this group membership, Marxist ideology, gaining ground and taking root was in Russia in the 1930s. Communist intellectuals that were very heavily influenced by Marx came in and told all of the poor people that these kulaks, who were farmers and also, the breadbasket of Europe, they fed millions of people. They had more than, your average Joe. But they weren't like super rich or anything. But anyways, these communist intellectuals told all the poor people in the villages and towns that the kulaks, they got all they had by stealing from you. So the poor people had an uprising and they killed and raped and looted all the kulaks, and this was known as dekulakization. But what they didn't realize is they just killed all the farmers that knew how to feed millions of people. And so as a result of this group identity game that they played, they killed the farmers that fed them. As a result, 6 million Ukrainian people starved to death. People who killed the kulaks didn't see them as individuals that might have worked hard for what they got. They actually saw the kulaks as being their enemies and as this group which had more money than them. These ideas were also copied by Mao in China during the 20th century, the mid part of the 20th century. And as a result, they think that upwards of 45 million people died because of this ideology. Now, in the 20th century as a whole, it's estimated that 65 to 100 million people died, starved to death, and were killed by Marxist doctrine. It got so bad that in the 1950s, if a kid was starving and let's say they stole something from a market, they would make the kid's parents dig the kid's grave and then bury their own kid alive. In the Ukraine in the 1930s, people were actually selling body parts as food to other people because of how starving everybody was. So you can kind of get my confusion. On page 15, I'm going to read you, it says, these perspectives are all consistent with a Christian view of the world, though some Christians may favor one perspective over the other. I don't know if I agree with that. I would encourage all of you to go look up and, read what happened in the 20th century because of Marxist ideology. But, all this to say that Marx and his theories were very murderous beyond belief. And so I would caution anyone looking through the social conflict lens to just be aware. There are some good things that social conflict perspective does get into, and I'm giving it kind of a bad rap, but one thing that I do like about social conflict theory is that conflict, when controlled, can be a really good thing, actually. But if it can't be controlled, watch out. For example, if you have a controlled argument with your girlfriend or boyfriend about some topic, maybe something's annoying you about them or your friend for that matter, but if you don't have that conversation, they'll just keep doing it. They'll just keep doing whatever annoys you about them. And so a little bit of conflict at the right time can actually be very helpful for the relationship. The last sociological perspective that we are going to look at is the interactionist perspective. Functionalist and the conflict perspectives are macro theories about how the world and society works. They focus on larger societal forces that construct the world. The interactionist perspective in sociology looks more like a micro theory, and what that means is that it looks more at the individual and how the individual's daily decision affect change in your society. The person that came up and popularized this idea was a guy named George Herbert Mead, and of course he was American. Other two perspectives that we learned about today were from Europe, from sociologists from Europe who kind of had more of a collective view on the social fabric of the world. The interactionist perspective focuses on the individual a little bit more than the collective, which mirrors the idea in America that the individual is sovereign. The interactionist perspective teaches that one, individual social interactions define how we see ourselves and others. Two, our perception of social situations changes the way we behave. And three, individuals interact to create, maintain, and change society. I have an example in the back of your book that I actually really liked, and they used the example of Jesus and how he worked one-on-one with people. It reminded me of the story about the woman and the well, and the story goes that Jesus went to a well and a Samaritan was there, and not only was she a Samaritan, but she was a woman, and not only was she a woman, but she had five marriages, and then the sixth guy she wasn't even married to. Jesus could have said, she fits into that group identity of Samaritan. I'm not messing around with her, I'm not talking to her. Jesus could have put her in a box of a woman. Yeah, women don't have anything good to say, like, why would I talk to her? Last box that Jesus could have saw her in was the box of floozy. And floozy means that she's she works her way around town. Jesus could have ignored the woman at the well because of all the group identities that he could have boxed her in as, but he chose to look at the woman as an individual that she was. I think the level of the individual is the right level of analysis because there can be infinite ways of describing you in your group identity. It didn't matter to Jesus whether what her race was. It didn't matter what her gender was. It didn't matter that about her life choices. Like all three of those are like the triple whammy. He didn't care about that. He just saw her as an individual. Wrap up all of these perspectives can give you a deeper understanding of the society that you're in, about other societies. I encourage you to learn as much as you can about these three sociological perspectives, so that you have a better idea of how other people think and how to understand yourself a little bit better as well. Each of these perspectives have something to teach you, and though I may think one is better than the other, that doesn't mean you shouldn't go through all of these lenses when learning about sociology. Anyways, I hope you guys learned something, and thanks for hanging out. There will be a part 2 of this lecture, and it's just going to go over some stuff unpopularly about research questions. So you're not done yet. Go to the next video. Thanks.